My name is Donna, and I live with my husband Anzin, son Banko, and daughter Omia. I am a teacher. We are Buddhist. Buddhists attempt to show loving kindness towards others and themselves without expecting anything in return. It is important to Buddhists to have this selfless attitude as it helps them overcome the three poisons, which are ignorance, greed, and hatred. My mother later went on to destroy my daughter forever by the first poison, her ignorance. So I need to give you an idea about my daughter's condition before you can understand how horribly my own mother acted with her later. Amila was born perfectly fine but had a lot of issues soon after. We went to the doctor several times, and they knew that she was having an allergic reaction to something. But every test came back negative, and we couldn't figure out what it was. It took 3 more months to figure it out. During that time, her allergic reactions got more and more severe. At one point, she was the only baby in the history of the hospital who had to be kept in a clean room because she seemed to have a reaction the minute she left. When that happened, we began an elimination therapy that would rival the lifestyle of Buddhist monks. My husband and I moved our son and the twins in with my husband's parents because we needed to eliminate everything from our routine to figure out what was causing the reaction in our little daughter. We stopped using our soap, our shampoo, our deodorants, our laundry detergents, and that was before we even got to our diet. It took us 3 more months, but we figured it out. Amila was allergic to coconut. The doctors told us that it was a particularly rare allergen, and so it wasn't on any of the skin test panels they ran. When we found out that she was allergic, we were relieved, so relieved. But in addition to feeling relieved, I delved into a bout of hysterical laughter. I laughed so hard I cried, and to this day, my husband tells me that he didn't know if I was crying from relief or pure happiness. You see, I come from a culture that uses coconut almost religiously. It's in our cooking. We break a coconut open at religious events. It's used in almost all sweets. It's in everything. The reason I was laughing was because of how much I hated one particular use for coconut. When I was a kid, pretty much up until I was in the 8th class, my mother would put coconut oil in my hair all the time. It looked greasy as hell. I hated it. And once I was old enough to start doing my own hair, I never put that stuff in my hair again. I was laughing so hard because of course I had a daughter with a severe allergy to the one thing I hated my entire life. We had a lot of fun telling people about her allergy, and everyone laughed because they all knew about my hatred for coconut oil. We told my mother, and she laughed as well. She made jokes about how my baby must have heard me talking about my hatred for coconut oil while she was still inside me and decided that she needed to hate it too. We all had a good laugh and left it at that, or so I thought. As far as raising my kids, my mother was a just yes 99.9% of the time. She was hands-off and respected all of my decisions, even if she didn't like them sometimes. For example, I chose not to raise my kids religiously, but I still took them to community events so they could understand their roots, and my mother never pushed them to pray. My mother and I have always had a contentious relationship at best. We got along well enough, but we disagree vehemently on certain topics. She wanted a traditional daughter who would be religious, get her bachelor's degree, marry a man that she and my father picked out, have 2 kids, a house in the suburbs near her, and be a stay-at-home mom like her. I'm not religious in the slightest. I got 2 undergraduate degrees, went on to get a master's and a PhD, didn't get married until 27, and I married a man who was the polar opposite of what my parents wanted. As if this wasn't enough, I was a working mom who didn't need her to babysit since my husband, and I made more than enough for a part-time nanny. Essentially, the best way I can summarize our relationship is by saying that she was very proud of me and loved to talk about my accomplishments, but I could always tell that she wished I was something else. We have a fair amount of safe topics that we can talk about, but I could never discuss anything too serious with her, such as politics or my career. Not because she'd get mad at me, but more so because she just wasn't interested, and I hate getting into conversations where I'm passionate about something, but the other person could care less. The only thing she continually got on my case about was the coconut oil thing. You see, my girls had textured and curly hair. We don't really know where they got it from, considering my husband and I have pinned straight hair that won't even hold a paperclip in it without slipping. I loved it. It was a little on the rough side, and my mother always insisted that a little bit of oil would make the curls soft and more defined. I'd always said no. Sure, we could have used a different type of oil, but my girls were still so young, and the allergy process had made me terrified of incorporating new things into their routine. I made sure I explained why to my mom too. She remembered what we'd gone through with Omila and her allergy. She brought me food and clothes to the hospital more than a few times. She helped me move all of my furniture and clothes out of my house when I was eliminating every possible source of allergen. She taught me how to cook from scratch when I was eliminating certain foods from the kids' diet. She knew everything about Omila's struggle. To this day, I cannot understand how she did what happened next. I'm getting really emotional right now, and I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind to narrate what happened. I will update this soon. I'm sorry the update took so long. I was caught up with something else. So coming back to Omila's incident, I was giving a midterm that day to my students, and I had to be at my research lab late that night. My husband was away at some conference, and our nanny was down with the flu, so she couldn't watch the kids that day. So I had my mom come take them for the day. Overnight visits with my parents weren't exactly common, but they weren't unusual either. They had always come back from these visits very happy and well taken care of, so I had no second thoughts about leaving them with my parents. They spoke to me on the phone after their lunch, and then, around 5 p.m., we video chatted. The kids looked happy and healthy. I got home around 10:30 p.m. that night and called my mom to see if the kids were up by any chance and I could say goodnight. I missed the kids by about 20 minutes. They'd already gone to bed. So I talked to my mom for a little bit, but she's a pretty early sleeper too, so we hung up and went to bed. I woke up around 5 a.m. the next morning to go pick up my husband from the airport at 6 a.m. We were going to get breakfast together and then go pick up the kids. I picked him up and neither one of us was very hungry yet, so we thought it'd be a nice treat to pick up the kids first and go to breakfast with my parents. We got to my parents' house at 7:45 a.m. My parents weren't there. My son was at the neighbor's house and ran outside with the neighbor as soon as he saw his daddy and I pull up. He was hysterical and crying, and I couldn't calm him down. My blood pressure was rising, thinking that something horrible had happened to my parents. My neighbor tells me that she isn't sure what's happening, but there was an ambulance at my parents' house at 6 a.m., and my dad had run over and wakes them up to see if they could watch my son for a few hours until he got back. Of course they'd said yes. I'm calling my parents nonstop at this point, and I'm getting frantic because I don't know what's happened. My son was still crying, but he was calmer. He still couldn't really explain to me what had happened, though. I honestly don't remember the details of what happened next, but somehow we figured out that the ambulance was from X hospital nearby, and we broke several driving laws trying to get there. We got to the hospital, pulled into the emergency entrance that was for ambulances only, left the car, and bolted inside. A few nurses took notice of us immediately and were asking us what was wrong. I was calmer than my husband at this point, so I explained that I didn't know, but my twin girls and my parents were here somewhere. I'll never forget the look on that nurse's face. She knew exactly who I was at that moment, and she was about to cry. Another nurse took me and my husband to an empty room and asked us to calm down and listen to the doctor before we went to find my family. Turns out my mother had put coconut oil in both my daughter's hair when they were playing the previous day before bed. The girls loved it when my mom did their hair, and so they had asked for braids, and my mom was doing their hair. She put coconut oil in both their hair because it would make for smoother braids. According to my son, Omilla started to get a little dizzy and itchy when my mom was doing her hair, so my mom gave her some baby Benadryl, which made her sleepy. Since it was close to bedtime anyways, the kids then went to bed. Giving her Benadryl was something we did whenever she had a mild reaction, since it usually meant she accidentally came across some coconut from a secondary source. We also showered her from head to toe immediately to erase any lingering traces of it. My mother simply gave her some Benadryl and kept the coconut oil in her hair and put her to sleep. The Benadryl made her sleepy and unable to wake up or be conscious enough to wake up her brother or cry. She vomited in her sleep and the rash spread all over. Her lower body was swollen to twice the size. She had asphyxiated in her sleep. She died painfully and slowly in the early hours of the morning. My mother had found her when she went to check on the kids in the morning around 5:30 a.m. She was already dead by then. My mother screamed, called for my dad, and that's when they'd gone to the hospital. My dad hadn't known about the coconut oil until my mom explained, and to this day, I've never seen my father so angry. He was still unable to look at my mother out of fury or me out of shame when I saw him at the hospital. They had rushed to the hospital hoping there was some way to save my Omilla and to get Omilla checked out immediately since he thought she might have a mild allergy as well. I can't even explain to you the emotions my husband and I felt. I remember seeing my little girl and just being in denial. There was no way that she was gone. This had to be a horrible, horrible nightmare. The following days, the funeral, and explaining to my other kids what had happened are events I still can't talk about because it just breaks a part of me. My mother was investigated, as was my entire family. I almost lost my other kids to CPS because they thought my kids were in serious danger. For those who don't know, CPS, Child Protective Services, is the agency charged with intervening in situations where child abuse and neglect is alleged in California. The first and most important thing to remember when dealing with CPS is that they don't want to take your children away from you unless your child is unsafe. My husband and I had to fight tooth and nail to show that uprooting them during this time would be the worst thing for them at the moment. My mother was never arrested. My father did leave her, though they're not officially divorced. The majority of my mother's family refused to speak to her, and the few that do speak to her only do so on a limited basis. She currently lives on her own in a small town, and every couple of months I'll get a call from her telling me how sorry she is and how she just wasn't thinking, and can I please find a way to forgive her. She wants to come see me. The only thing I can find to ever say to her is you can come see me when you bring my daughter with you. It's been 13 years since this incident. My son Banco just got his license this year and Omia is going to start high school soon. Both of them are healthy and are turning into amazing adults, but neither one has been the same since Omila passed away. Banco is extremely protective of Omia and doesn't allow anyone to breathe rudely in her presence. Omia used to be such a bubbly and talkative little child, but she's quiet now. When she does speak, it takes some effort to hear her because she's so quiet. She told me a few years ago that she knew she was only a baby when that incident with her sister happened, but she feels incomplete all the time, like a part of her is missing. I didn't know what to say to her. My heart breaks for my poor, innocent Omila even today. If it weren't for my husband, I don't think I could have ever recovered from the loss of one of my twin daughters. We have helped each other through the loss, and rightfully so. It's taken over a decade of therapy to even get to this point. I don't know what I expect to get out of typing all of this out, but I've seen how much comfort this subreddit brings other posters. So hopefully I find some of the same peace. Thank you for reading our story.